Friends, let me give you a warm word of welcome to our service this morning, our last service together as a congregation on the year 2023. I hope the passage that we're looking at this morning is found in 1 Samuel chapter 7. Turn with me, please, to 1 Samuel 7, and we're going to read from verse 3 to verse 13. Of this chapter of God's Word. 1 Samuel chapter 7, and we read from verse 3, page 277, if you're following in the church Bibles. 1 Samuel 7, and we read from verse 3. Samuel said to all the house of Israel, "If you're returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your heart to the Lord and serve him only. And he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines." So the people of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and they served the Lord only. Then Samuel said, "Gather all Israel at Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you." So they gathered at Mizpah and drew water and poured it out before the Lord and fasted on that day. And they said there, "We have sinned against the Lord." And Samuel judged the people of Israel at Mizpah. Now when the Philistines heard the people of Israel had gathered at Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the people of Israel heard of it, they were afraid of the Philistines. And the people of Israel said to Samuel, "Do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines." So Samuel took a suckling lamb and offered it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. And Samuel cried out to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him. As Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to attack Israel, but the Lord thundered with a mighty sound that day against the Philistines and threw them into confusion, and they were defeated before Israel. And the men of Israel went out from Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and struck them as far as below Beth-kar. Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen and called its name Ebenezer. For he said, "Till now the Lord has helped us." So the Philistines were subdued and did not again enter the territory of Israel. And the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. We'll end there at verse 13 and pray that God would bless this reading of his word. Please keep that passage open in front of you as we come this morning to look just at one verse in that passage, verse 12 of 1 Samuel chapter 7. Ebenezer. It's not a name that we hear very often today. It's not a name that many parents choose for their newborn sons. But it is a name that's associated with this time of year. Maybe you're scratching your head and you're thinking, Ebenezer? How is Ebenezer associated with Christmas and the New Year? Well, maybe if I told you the person's surname, certainly a lot of our young people would know the Ebenezer I'm thinking about that's associated with Christmas and New Year. His surname is Scrooge. All of you, I'm sure, have read maybe Dickens' Christmas Carol, or you've certainly seen the Muppets' Christmas Carol at some stage over many Christmas pasts. And you'll know Ebenezer Scrooge, that character in Dickens' Christmas Carol, a mean, grumpy old man who's visited by 3 ghosts over the course of Christmas Eve. And as a result of the visits of those 3 ghosts, he's completely transformed. You've seen it on TV. You've read it. I'm sure, as I said, you've watched it on Muppets' Christmas Carol over the Christmas holidays. But for God's people, there is a better reason to associate the name Ebenezer with this time of year. And we find that reason in our passage today in 1 Samuel 7, verse 12. We read how the Philistine army was about to invade Israel, how God caused confusion in their ranks. He produced a thunderous sound in the heavens. Whether it was thunder or some other almighty sound, we don't know, but whatever it was, it threw the Philistine army into complete confusion, and they were routed, crushed by the Israelites. And Samuel took a stone. It wasn't just a little stone, it would have been a large stone, maybe as large as the stones that are set up in Stonehenge. And he set it up as a monument, a memorial, that victory. And he called that stone Ebenezer. Ebenezer, which means stone of help. Eben is Hebrew for stone. Ezer comes from Ezer, the Hebrew for help, stone of help, Ebenezer. And he explains the significance of this name by saying, till now, the Lord has helped us. This is a stone of help because till now, the Lord has helped us. The stone he set up was a monument, a memorial to God's help. The help that God had given, yes, in that particular battle, but that he had given Israel on many, many occasions up until that point in time. And at the end of the year, as another year passes in a few hours, passes into memory, passes into history, we do well at this time of year to copy Samuel's example, to raise an Ebenezer, a memorial to God's help in this past year. Now, I'm not encouraging you to go home, to go to the garden centre and buy a huge stone and set it up tomorrow morning as a huge monument to God's help. But a mental or physical recollection, taking time today to mentally or physically write down some of the things that God has done for us, just to remind yourself, a public or private declaration of God's help, his deliverance, his support over this past year. What God has done for us, what God has done for you in 2023. Why? What purpose? What benefits are there for taking time to look back and remember God's help to us up until this point in our lives? Well, here in our passage today, we see at least 4 reasons, 4 benefits for looking back and remembering, raising our Ebenezers, taking time at this time of year to remember, memorialize God's help. Firstly, this Ebenezer stone that was erected by Samuel was a stone to spark the memory. It was a stone to spark the memory. Samuel erected this stone so that people seeing it, people walking past, would remember the victory that God had given them over the Philistines. And that's the primary purpose of any memorial. It's in the name, memorial. To bring to our memory, to bring to mind the particular event or the particular purpose to whom, or particular person to whom that memorial was erected. War memorials. The 2 memorials, or the one memorial to the 2 world wars in War Memorial Park. The memorial erected not so very long ago to the Korean War in War Memorial Park. They are built to remind us, to keep in our memories, to bring to our minds those wars and the soldiers who served, who gave their lives in those wars, to remember. Statues of famous people in public places, kings and queens and prime ministers, explorers. They're designed to keep those people in living memory, in our minds. Those little blue plaques that we see on historical buildings, to memorialize a certain person who lived in that building or who worked in that building at a certain point in their lives. It's to keep that person, to keep their achievements in our minds. Remember them. And that's why Samuel erected this stone. When people saw it, when people walked past it, they would be reminded of the victory the Israelites had won over the Philistines. And more importantly, that they would remember the help of God behind that victory. He didn't call the stone the Battle of Mizpah Memorial Stone, no, focusing the people's attention on the battle. He called it Ebenezer, the stone of help, focusing the people's attention on God's help, the God who was behind that victory in the Battle of Mizpah, the God who brought the victory. And it wasn't only this particular incident of God's help that he wanted the people to remember when they looked at the stone. In saying, until now has the Lord helped us. Until now, up until this point in time, the Lord has helped us. He wanted the people to remember all the help that God had given them up until this point in time. God's bringing them out of Egypt, out of slavery in Egypt. God's bringing them through the wilderness, that challenging journey. We read how he fed them, how he helped them, how he clothed them, how he kept their sandals from wearing out, how he brought them into the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey, how he himself drove out the inhabitants of the land. His help in recent times past, in protecting them from the attacks of their neighboring nations. He erected this stone to help them remember God's help. And we are to erect memorials for exactly the same purpose, to help us remember what God has done for us. It's taking time to mentally recall, to make a mental note or a physical note of what God has done for you this year, what God has done for you in the past. Mental or physical lists of times in which we've seen God at work or been conscious of God being at work in your life in some way. Little physical reminders of an instance in which you're in some need of help and God worked his help for you. Little physical reminder. Why? Why do we need these little reminders? Because we're so quick to forget, aren't we? We are so forgetful, so quick to forget. And all the activity of life, the busyness of life, the pressure of life, our human forgetfulness, we are people who quickly forget God's help. And he's given us little means of things, little means by which to help us remember his work and his help. The Sabbath day, today, one day in the week when we're to stop, we're to focus our minds on God, we're to think about him, remember him. He gives us the Sabbath to stop and remember. The Lord's Supper, simple meal, bread and wine, instituted by Jesus to help us remember him, to focus on his death and what he accomplished by his death. Do this in remembrance of me, Jesus said. A little means, a method of remembering. And this, what we have in 1 Samuel 7, another simple means of remembering by raising our Ebenezers. Taking time at landmark points in our lives, landmark points of the year, to make mental, maybe physical notes of God's help, physical reminders of his help, to help us remember that help. Taking stock as individuals, all of us as individuals, thinking maybe of situations he has brought you through in this past year, health issues that you experienced, that God brought you through, dilemmas, difficulties, pressures, that you faced that he's helped you through? Taking time to remember the help he's given you, not only as individuals, but as families. As families. Maybe a challenge you faced, a problem you faced as a family, a bereavement that you've gone through as a family, a worry that you've borne as a family, that he has helped you through. Recalling God's help to us as a congregation, little group of God's people over this past year, the blessings that he's granted us this year as a church, the fellowship, the teaching, the encouragement, the blessing of sitting under his word week after week, sitting again at the Lord's table and celebrating Christ's death for us, the forgiveness that is ours through Jesus' blood. Seeing some of our covenant children come into membership, publicly profess faith in Jesus. Seeing a young lady publicly profess her faith, being baptized as a public profession of her faith. Taking time to stop, remember, celebrate what God has done for us as a congregation in this past year. We announced, as part of our announcements, our AGM last Thursday night of January. Why do we bother? Why do we have an annual general meeting? One of the reasons is to recount, to write down, and to remember God's help, God's blessing, a means of remembering him, so that God's help to us as a congregation in this year past isn't forgotten, isn't passed over and forgotten. We are raising our Ebenezer as a means of remembering him. It's a stone to spark the memory. But secondly, this Ebenezer stone that Samuel erected at Mizpah was a stone to stand as a testimony. It was a stone to stand as a testimony. This stone that Samuel erected, without any words, it spoke to people who saw it. It spoke to the people as they passed by. It bore witness. It bore testimony to the victory that God has given his people. And in doing so, it bore witness to the reality of God. It bore witness, testimony to the power of God. It bore testimony to the love of God for his people. It bore testimony to the judgment of God on his enemies. Exactly the same way those memorials in Memorial Park in town bear testimony to those wars that they commemorate, the reality of those wars. They happened. They tell our young people there were 2 world wars in which millions of people died. They proclaim the reality, the happening of those events, the sacrifice of those who served and died. They bear testimony. That's why Samuel erected this stone as a testimony, as a witness to those events and to God's help in those events. And that again is one of the reasons why we too are to raise our Ebenezers, our mental and physical monuments to God's help, in order to bear testimony. To bear testimony firstly before God. To bear testimony before God of his help. It's just a simple acknowledgement to God of his help. The Ebenezer stone that Samuel erected was an acknowledgement by Samuel that the people of Israel hadn't won that victory on their own. It had been accomplished by God, by his power. God did this. And our Ebenezers, our mental recollections, our physical memorials are an acknowledgement before God of his help, that God did this. I didn't get myself through 2023. I didn't get myself through that loss. I didn't get myself through that period of anxiety and stress. I didn't conjure up all the blessings I have by myself. It was God. They bear testimony before God of his gracious work in our lives. But they also bear testimony to God's people of his work in our lives. They bear testimony to our fellow believers. Samuel set up this stone so that it might speak to the people of Israel as they saw it, as they walked past. It would bear testimony. It would speak to them of the power, the reality of God, the love and the help of the Lord their God. So they might be encouraged in their God, built up in their faith, their trust in him, their love for him. And so too, our memorials bear testimony to our fellow Christians of God's goodness and God's help. As we raise our Ebenezers, we reveal our Ebenezers. We tell one another how God helped me this past year, how God has helped me up until this point in my life, how God has blessed me. What are we doing? We're bearing testimony to one another of God and his help. You know, as we reveal in our conversations, Sabbath by Sabbath. Let me tell you how God has helped me this week. As we reveal in our prayers, a Thursday evening or Sunday morning, Sunday evening, as we talk about or pray about the things that God has brought us through, the refuge, the peace, the joy that God has been to us, the love and the patience, the forgiveness, the restoration he has shown. Maybe as we point people to the physical monuments of God's goodness to us, the physical scars on our bodies of the surgery he's brought us through, point to a relationship that he has restored in this past year, a restored child, some other memorial of God's help. We are bearing witness to one another of God's help to us over this past year, and we're mutually encouraged. Our faith is built up as we see and hear each other's Ebenezer stones. And that being the case, we're to share our Ebenezer. There's many things, yes, that God brings us through that are private and personal, and we keep to ourselves, yes. It's right and proper. But there are many things that God brings us through and helps us with as God's people that we're to share, we're to raise, we're to show in order to encourage one another of the reality and the power and the love and the help of our God. Our Ebenezers bear testimony to God's people. They also bear testimony to the world. The stone that Samuel set up served as a testimony to all who passed by, not just the Israelites, but the Philistines and people from other nations who passed through Mizpah. It proclaimed to the world that the mighty victory that God had accomplished there at Mizpah. And in doing so, again, it proclaimed the reality of God. He exists. It proclaimed the power of God, the love, the judgment of God. And again, our memorials are to act as a testimony to the world, the unbelieving world. As we raise our Ebenezers, as we remember and we recount to others God's help and blessing, as we put on public display our memorials to God's help and his dealings with us, they're a testimony to a watching world of God. The reality of God, the power of God, the help of God, the love of God for his people, the ability of God to bring his people through any number of situations. They're a testimony to the watching world of God and his help. Our Ebenezers, our verbal or otherwise public monuments to God's help, they're a testimony, yes, before God, but they're a testimony to God's people. And they're a testimony to the watching world. It was a stone that is set up to stand as a testimony. A stone to spark the memory, a stone to stand as a testimony. Thirdly, this Ebenezer stone that was erected by Samuel was a stone to stir up thanks. It was a stone to stir up thanks. Yes, as we stand again before the war memorial, anytime, but particularly on Remembrance Sunday or over Remembrance Weekend, as we stand before the war memorial, we're reminded of those terrible events of 2 world wars, and we think about what might have been if those men and women named on the memorial hadn't served and given their lives. We are stirred to give thanks for those men and women who served and died, and to thank God for preserving our nation and preserving the freedom that we have as a nation. Or as you go to the graves of your loved ones and you stand before that headstone, again, another memorial stone that memorializes your loved one and their life. It's a monument to their life. We not only remember our loved ones, we thank God for them, don't we? Those monuments, those memorials stir us to thank God. And that's one of the reasons that Samuel set up this stone, so that when people saw it and they were reminded of the victory that God had given them in the past, they would be stirred to thank him. To thank him. And again, it's one of the reasons why we ought to erect memorials in our lives to God's help. That in remembering the past, our hearts will be stirred to thank him. To thank him. And as we look back, maybe this afternoon or at some stage over these coming days, as we look back over 2023 and we remember what God has done for us over the course of this past year as individuals and as families and as a congregation, it's not something we're just to do as a cold mental exercise, write down, yeah, remember that. Yeah, that was good. I enjoyed that. Oh, that was wonderful. Oh, it was tough, but God was really good to me. It's not something we do as a cold mental exercise. But in order to stir our hearts to thank him and being reminded of some of the things God has done for us and given us, we'd be stirred in our hearts to worship him and thank him. Remembering those situations you were faced with, that he helped you, and remembering the personal blessings that he has poured out upon you as an individual over the course of the year. Remembering the health that you've enjoyed over the course of the year, the perseverance, the patience that he has developed in you, the energy, the strength that he has given you, the deliverance that he has given you in some situation, the forgiveness that he granted you on that occasion that you wandered away. Remembering those things, you'd be stirred to thank him. Remembering as a family the recovery, maybe he granted one of your loved ones, his help over a period of particular difficulty, his comfort to you in a period of bereavement and loss. The protection, those of you who are parents, the protection that he has given your little ones over the course of these 12 months. The salvation maybe he's brought to some of your little ones or to someone in your family circle. In remembering those things, we'd be stirred to thank him. Remembering as a congregation the blessings again he has given us through his word. Fellowship with our brothers and sisters in Jesus, seeing him at work again in the lives of our little ones. The privilege of being part of the work of his kingdom and the help of his Spirit in that work over this past year. In remembering those things, we'd be stirred to thank him. And not only as we raise our own memorials, but again, as we see others raise theirs. As people come to us and say, let me tell you what God has done for me this past year. Let me tell you the most amazing, the biggest thing, the thing that I will remember most about God's help in 2023. Yes, we stirred to give thanks for God's help in our lives, but we stirred to give thanks for God's help in their lives. We raise our memorials to stir us to thank him. A stone to stir up thanks. A stone to spark the memory, a stone to stand as a testimony, a stone to stir up thanks. Fourthly and finally, the Ebenezer stone that was erected by Samuel was a stone to stimulate trust. It was a stone to stimulate trust. When Samuel called the monument Ebenezer, the stone of help, because up until now the Lord has helped us, he wasn't saying to the people of Israel, well, up until now God has helped us, but he's not going to help us anymore. So we've got to thank God for all his help in the past. That's not what he was saying. He was making the point, up until now, up until this point in time, God has helped us. And friends, we can expect the very same help in the future. Being a God who is faithful, being a God who is changeless, being a God who is a covenant God of covenant love, a love that once he sets upon us, he can never take away. Being a covenant-keeping, changeless, faithful God, how he has helped us in the past is how he'll help us in the future. Now, not necessarily in the same way. It's not what I'm saying. But how he has helped us in the past assures us that he will help us in the future. This monument to God's help in the past that Samuel raised was a symbol of the help God's people could rely on for the future. It was a stone to stimulate trust. And the very next time the Philistine army mustered on Israel's border, thousands of them, tens of thousands of them, and the earth shook as they marched towards Israel. The people of Israel lifted their eyes and they looked at the Ebenezer stone, and they could be assured God helped us in the past. He delivered us in an impossible situation from these very same people in the past. Can he do it again? Yes, he can. It was a stone to stimulate trust. And similarly, our monuments, our recollections of God's help in the past, the little lists that we make, are physical reminders to us of the things that God has brought us through in the past. They are to us a token, a symbol, an assurance of his help in the future, that in remembering his help in the past, we have assurance of his help in the future. He helped me in 2023. I know he'll help me in 2024. He blessed me. Oh, how he blessed me in 2023. He's going to bless me in 2024. What will 2024 hold for each of us? What will this new year bring to you as an individual, as a family, as a congregation? We don't know. We don't know. Only time will tell. But there's two things, at least two things of which we can be certain in this coming year. Firstly, 2024 will hold things that we won't enjoy. That will be hard. That will be painful. But the second reality of which we can be certain is God's help in those things that we don't enjoy. That will be hard. That will be painful. And we prepare ourselves to face those things that are hard and difficult and painful in 2024 by remembering God's help in the past, stimulating our trust for him in the present and into the future. Reminding ourselves that the faithful, changeless, covenant God who helped us and blessed us in 2023 is the faithful, covenant, changeless God who will help us in 2024. The monuments that we raise, maybe today, as we remember, as we make little notes about how God has helped us in the past, stimulate our trust as we look forward to 2024. What has God helped you with? What has God brought you through in this past year? Now look at your memorial. Now run down that mental or physical list of God's help to you in 2023. And in doing so, be assured of his help in the future, in the year to come, whatever it may bring. And those, very simply, are the blessings of raising an Ebenezer. They spark the memory. They stand as a testimony. They stir us to thanks. And they stimulate trust. Each of you, certainly those over primary school age, I think, have been given a little stone as you came into church this morning. It's a little Ebenezer stone for 2023. And shortly, we don't do this very much. We don't do it enough. We're going to sit in silence. And we're going to think over this past year. And I want you to think how God has helped you and how God has blessed you in 2023. And I encourage you, whenever you go home this afternoon, take some time, maybe as individuals or as families, to do the same thing. And take a little pencil, take a permanent marker, or I can lend you my paints that I got from Amazon to paint those little stones. And you can write in the bottom of the stone a way in which God has helped you, a name, a date, a person, a place, a situation, whatever blessing that God has granted you in 2023. And friends, let it be an Ebenezer for you. A memorial that sparks your memory, that stands as testimony, whether it's on your mantelpiece or your fireplace, your hearth, on a shelf or on your desk, that speaks to you, reminds you, speaks to others. What's that for? What's that about? It stirs you to thanks. That stimulates your trust. And for those of you today who aren't Christians, the stone that you have been given, it's a physical reminder to you. Those of you who aren't Christians, it's a physical reminder to you of God's continued grace to you over another year. God in his grace has brought you to the end of another year, spared you to see another new year. It's a physical reminder of the help, the transformation that God offers you to give you, to bless you with. That transformation that Dickens writes in A Christmas Carol, that Ebenezer Scrooge experienced. Those three ghosts came to him, the ghosts of Christmas past, Christmas present, and Christmas future. It's a picture of the transformation that God offers you. He offers to transform your past, take away your sin, place it in Jesus and punish it in him. He offers to transform your present, to give you hope and a help and power and energy in the present, the spirit in the present. And he offers to transform your future, to give you a future that you cannot attain on your own, forgiveness with him and life eternal with him in heaven. That little stone that you have in your hand and you take home is a reminder to you of God's offer of that help, that transformation. And your refusal to accept it thus far in 2023. It stands as a memorial to the judgment that you're under because of that refusal, if you're not a Christian. It could yet be a reminder of God's help and grace and transforming work in your life, if you'd only repent and believe. What a glorious day it would be. And what a memorial stone it would be. Today you would give your life to him. And it would be a memorial to the grace and work and power and love of God in your life. Something you could look back on and be a reminder of all you've been given in God and have to look forward to in God. But as God's people, let's raise our Ebenezers today, remembering what God has done for us, testifying openly to his goodness and help, thanking him for all that is past and trusting him for all that is to come. Amen.